Imagine waking up in the middle of the night. The bells of Paris are ringing, but not to celebrate, not to pray. They are ringing as a signal to kill. Outside your window, the streets are filled with screaming. Your neighbors are being dragged from their homes. Men, women, children, slaughtered in the darkness. The Seine River runs red with blood. And the man who ordered all of this? He is 22 years old. He is the King of France, and he is watching from the windows of the Louvre with a smile. This is the story of Charles IX, the king historians call the most bloodthirsty ruler in the entire history of France. To understand Charles IX, you have to understand the world he was born into. It is 1550. France is a kingdom on the edge of civil war. For decades, a brutal religious conflict has been tearing the country apart. On one side, the Catholics, loyal to Rome and to the crown. On the other, the Protestants, known as the Huguenots, followers of John Calvin, growing faster every year. These weren't just theological disagreements. This was about power, about land, about who would control France. Charles is born on June 27th, 1550, the third son of King Henry II and the infamous Catherine de Medici, an Italian noblewoman whose name would become synonymous with manipulation, poison, and political cunning. He is not supposed to be king. His older brother, Francis II, takes the throne first. But Francis is weak, sickly, and dies after just 17 months of rule. He is 16 years old. The second brother, Louis, dies even before that, as a child. And so, by a cruel twist of fate, Charles becomes King of France at the age of 10. 10 years old, sitting on the most powerful throne in Europe, surrounded by enemies he cannot yet understand. And behind him, always, his mother, Catherine de Medici, whispering in his ear. Catherine de Medici was not a woman you wanted as an enemy. She had survived the treacherous courts of Italy. She had watched her husband take a mistress and openly humiliate her for years. She had buried 2 of her sons before they could grow old. And through all of it, she had learned one thing above everything else. Survival requires ruthlessness. As Charles grew, Catherine controlled every aspect of his life. His education, his friendships, his fears. She fed him stories of Protestant conspiracies. She made him paranoid, anxious, and deeply dependent on her guidance. Witnesses at court describe young Charles as a troubled boy. He had violent mood swings. He was obsessed with hunting, sometimes spending entire days slaughtering animals in a kind of frenzy. Some historians believe he showed early signs of what we would today call severe anxiety or even psychosis. He was not a monster by nature, but he was being shaped into one. By 1570, the religious wars in France had already caused tens of thousands of deaths. Charles, now 20 years old, seemed to want peace. He signed the Edict of Saint-Germain, a treaty granting Protestants significant freedoms. He even invited the most powerful Huguenot leader in France, Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, to court. Coligny was everything Catherine de Medici feared. He was brilliant, charismatic, and he was gaining enormous influence over the young king. Charles began calling him my father. He started listening to Coligny's advice over his mother's. For Catherine, this was unacceptable. She began to plot. In August 1572, thousands of Huguenot nobles flooded into Paris for a royal wedding, the marriage of the Protestant Henry of Navarre to Charles's sister, Margaret of Valois. It was supposed to be a symbol of peace, a union between Catholics and Protestants. It would become the greatest trap in French history. On August 22, 1572, just 2 days after the wedding, someone tried to assassinate Admiral Coligny. He was shot in the street, losing 2 fingers. He survived. Charles was furious. He visited Coligny personally, swearing justice. But then something happened, something that changed everything. That night, Catherine de Medici entered the king's private chambers. We don't know exactly what she said. The doors were closed. The conversation was private. But when Charles emerged, he was a different man. Some historians believe she convinced him that the Huguenots were planning a coup, that Coligny's assassination attempt was just the beginning of a Protestant uprising that would destroy the monarchy. Others believe she simply threatened him, blackmailed him, broke him. Whatever she said, it worked. Charles IX, King of France, gave the order. Kill them all. It is just after midnight on August 24th, 1572, the feast day of Saint Bartholomew. The bells of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois begin to ring. That is the signal. Catholic militias, who had been waiting, armed, in the darkness, pour into the streets of Paris. They have lists, names, addresses. Protestant leaders are targeted first. Admiral Coligny is dragged from his bed, stabbed repeatedly, and thrown from his window into the courtyard below. His body is later beheaded and dragged through the streets of Paris. But it doesn't stop there. What begins as a targeted political assassination quickly becomes something far more horrifying: a mass slaughter. Ordinary Parisians join in, neighbors killing neighbors, servants killing masters, Catholics marking their doors with white crosses so the killers know who to spare. The screaming fills the city for 3 days. The Seine River carries so many bodies that fishing was banned downstream for months. By the time the killing stops in Paris alone, estimates range from 3,000 to 10,000 dead. When the massacres spread to the rest of France over the following weeks, to Lyon, Bordeaux, Rouen, Toulouse, the total death toll reaches somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 people. Men, women, children, slaughtered because of the church they prayed in. And Charles IX? According to multiple accounts from courtiers and ambassadors present at the Louvre, the king stood at the windows during the massacre. He watched the chaos below, and he fired his arquebus at the fleeing figures in the streets. Whether this is historically confirmed or embellished legend remains debated, but the ambassadors who reported it, including the Venetian envoy, believed it completely, because it fit everything they had observed about the king. When news of the massacre reached Pope Gregory XIII in Rome, he ordered celebratory cannon fire and had a commemorative medal struck. In Protestant Europe, the reaction was one of absolute horror. Queen Elizabeth I of England received the French ambassador in silence, dressed in black, refusing to speak. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre did not end the religious wars. It ignited them. Here is what most people don't know about Charles IX. He never recovered. In the months after the massacre, the king began to deteriorate mentally and physically. He couldn't sleep. He suffered from violent nightmares. Courtiers reported that he would wake up screaming in the night, drenched in sweat, raving about blood. He became increasingly erratic, paranoid. He started to push his mother away, consumed by guilt and rage. He reportedly told his Protestant nurse, a woman named Madeline who had cared for him since childhood, "What bloodshed, what murders, what evil counsel have I followed?" The man who had ordered the killing of tens of thousands was haunted by what he had done. He was also dying. Charles IX suffered from tuberculosis, a disease that was slowly destroying his lungs. But the deterioration accelerated dramatically after August 1572. Whether from illness, guilt, or both, his body was giving out. In May 1574, less than 2 years after the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, Charles IX died. He was 23 years old. According to his nurse Madeline, his final hours were agonizing, not just physically, but mentally. He wept, he confessed, he spoke of the dead. There is one account unverified but repeated by multiple sources, that in his final moments, blood began seeping from the pores of his skin, a phenomenon sometimes associated with advanced tuberculosis or extreme psychological trauma. The most bloodthirsty king in French history died weeping in the arms of his nurse, consumed by the weight of what he had done. He left behind no legitimate heir. The crown passed to his brother, Henry III. And Catherine de Medici, she outlived 3 of her sons on the throne of France. She died in 1589 at 69 years old, still scheming, still surviving. She was never held accountable for a single death. So, was Charles IX truly the most bloodthirsty king in French history? The numbers speak for themselves. No single act of royal violence in French history comes close to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. 30,000 dead in a matter of weeks, a river choked with bodies, a country traumatized for generations. But here is the question that historians still argue about today. Was Charles IX a monster, or was he a broken young man manipulated by forces he could never fully control? The truth is probably somewhere in between. He gave the order. He pulled the trigger, perhaps literally. He bears responsibility that cannot be erased. But he was also a 10-year-old boy placed on the most dangerous throne in Europe, raised by a woman who saw human lives as chess pieces, surrounded by men whose fortunes depended on his fear and his weakness. He was shaped into a weapon and then blamed for the damage. The bells of St. Bartholomew rang 500 years ago, but in the history of France, they have never truly stopped. If you want to know about the cruelest king in French history, a man who locked his enemies in iron cages for years, who ruled through terror and psychological torture, stay tuned. Louis XI is coming next. If this video moved you, leave a comment below. Who do you think was the most terrifying ruler in history? And don't forget to subscribe, because French history is darker than you think.